You've been taught to follow, not to understand, to memorize, not to question. From the moment you could think, you were handed a script. Go to school, get good grades, get a job, buy a house, retire quietly, and you called it life. But have you ever stopped to ask, who wrote that script, and why do you trust it? You didn't choose most of what you believe. You inherited it from parents, teachers, systems designed not to make you think, but to make you manageable. That's not wisdom. That's obedience. Elon figured this out early. He realized that most people aren't thinking, they're just repeating. They confuse familiarity with truth, popularity with logic. They call it tradition. He calls it mental laziness. And that's not an insult. It's a system default. School trains you to remember, not question. Jobs train you to comply, not reimagine. Society praises you when you do what everyone else is doing, even if no one knows why. Elon learned that when he was a child in South Africa. He'd ask simple questions like, why do we learn it this way? Or, what if we did it the opposite? And adults would flinch, not because they had better answers, but because the question itself exposed how fragile their own logic was. People don't fear being wrong. They fear being seen as uncertain. And conventional wisdom provides certainty without clarity. It gives you the illusion of stability, but removes your ability to think from scratch. Elon never accepted that. He always wanted to know, what's underneath this belief? Where did it come from? What are its parts? He once said, I tend to approach things from a physics framework. What are the fundamental truths, and how can I reason up from there? That's the difference. Most people reason by analogy. Elon reasons by reality. Analogy thinking says, this worked before, so it must work again. First principles thinking says, forget what worked. What actually makes sense? One copies, the other deconstructs. And if you never deconstruct, you'll live your whole life believing in things simply because others do. That's not thought. That's automation. That's not identity. That's inheritance. And Elon's entire life has been about rejecting inherited assumptions. He doesn't just question what the world believes. He questions why they believe anything at all. Why do adults push children to conform? Why do companies punish disagreement? Why do governments define success as safety, not truth? Conventional wisdom answers none of these. It just says, this is the way. But Elon doesn't follow ways. He breaks paths. That's why he dropped out of Stanford after 2 days. Why he built Zip2 and sold it without anyone's permission. Why he bet every dollar from PayPal on rockets and batteries when the media called him a clown. Because he didn't want to be respected for following rules. He wanted to be useful for rewriting them. And that's what terrifies people. Someone who thinks from zero threatens everyone who builds from imitation. Because if he's right, then the entire system is wrong, and people would rather protect the system than question their place inside it. But Elon doesn't care where you stand. He cares what's true, and he's willing to be alone in that search. So ask yourself, are you living your life, or just executing a script you never wrote? Are your beliefs yours, or just leftovers you've never challenged? If the answer makes you uncomfortable, good. That's the first signal you're finally thinking. So, if you're done living by default and ready to think like someone who never needed permission, subscribe to Mind of Musk. Because the future doesn't belong to the well-behaved. It belongs to those who dismantle everything first and then rebuild it on truth. Most people build on top of what they've been told. Elon builds by tearing everything apart first. That's the difference. He doesn't trust assumptions, even the ones people call truth. He doesn't build on belief. He builds on physics. He calls it first principles thinking, not a strategy, not a mindset, a framework, a scalpel, a way of thinking that cuts through noise, tradition, and ego to reach the atomic layer of truth. While most people ask, how do we improve what exists? Elon asks, what if what exists is fundamentally broken? Because if you start with a flawed foundation, Everything you build on top is a polished disaster. Most people reason by analogy. They say, this worked for others, let's copy, tweak, optimize. That's safe, predictable. But Elon doesn't want predictable, he wants correct. He once said, boil things down to the most fundamental truths, then reason up from there. That's first principles. It means taking an idea and crushing it into raw facts. It means ignoring what's popular, what's normal, what's accepted. Most people inherit mental shortcuts. Elon dissects them. He asks, what's the underlying physics? What is this thing really made of? What are the hard facts? No spin, no opinion, no social approval needed. And then he rebuilds from the bottom. He did this with electric cars. Everyone said they weren't viable. Too expensive, too ugly, too slow. Instead of asking how to market EVs better, Elon asked, what are the raw materials of a battery? What's the actual cost at atomic scale? Turns out the chemistry didn't justify the price. The supply chain did. So he restructured it. That's not business innovation. That's physics applied to capitalism. He did the same with rockets. The industry assumed rockets were single-use, because that's how it's always been. But Elon asked, if a $60 million plane could only fly once, would that make sense? Of course not. So why tolerate that for rockets? No one had a good answer, so he created one. Same with schools. He didn't try to reform the system. He questioned the root. Why do kids hate learning? Maybe it's not them. Maybe it's the environment, the factory model, the forced memorization. So he started Ad Astra, his own school, with no grade levels, no meaningless subjects, only problem solving. First principles means you stop worshiping what worked yesterday and start investigating what works now. It's uncomfortable. It's isolating. But it's the only way to build something that doesn't collapse under scrutiny. Elon's obsession with this thinking style makes him almost alien in boardrooms. While others ask, what's the best practice? He asks, who defined that? And were they competent? He doesn't value precedent. He values precision. That's why people misunderstand him. He doesn't argue to win. He argues to remove illusion. First principles thinking is not faster. It's not easier. It's slower. It's harder. It requires the humility to admit that everything you've built so far might be wrong. And most people would rather protect a lie they understand than rebuild a truth they fear. But Elon doesn't care about pride. He cares about accuracy. He says, you are always wrong, just less wrong over time. That's what drives him, a desire not to be right, but to be less wrong every day. That's why he questions so much, why he obsesses over root cause, why he's willing to look stupid if it means cutting closer to the core. People call him reckless, arrogant, unstable, but that's only because they don't understand what he's doing. He's not building for approval, he's building for coherence. A world that doesn't just work, but makes sense from the ground up. That's what first principles deliver. Not better answers, better questions. The kind of questions most people never dare to ask, because they already chose comfort over clarity a long time ago. Innovation doesn't die because of bad ideas. It dies because of old ones. Ideas that were useful once, then turned into commandments, protected by experts, enforced by systems. That's what conventional wisdom is. A graveyard of forgotten context. It tells you how things are done, not why they started that way. And once you stop asking why, you start living by default. Elon doesn't tolerate defaults. He resets everything. Most people build on frameworks they've never questioned. Elon doesn't build on frameworks. He breaks them. Because if the structure is wrong, efficiency just makes you fail faster. That's why he refuses to optimize what's broken. He replaces it. He replaced the car industry's obsession with gasoline. He replaced the space industry's addiction to waste. He replaced social media's addiction to dopamine with a focus on infrastructure. That's not iteration. That's rejection. Rejection of the norms, the metrics, the mental scripts that other people build careers around. Elon doesn't want to improve the rules. He wants to rewrite the game. Most industries punish disruption. They disguise it as risk management. They protect what they call best practices. but what they really mean is least resistance. And resistance is where truth lives. That's why Elon always moves toward friction. If everyone agrees something is a bad idea, he looks closer. Because mass rejection often hides the deepest opportunity. People said reusable rockets were a joke. Now SpaceX is the only one landing them. People said electric cars were dead. Now Tesla outsells legacy brands. People said Twitter was unfixable. Elon turned it into a battleground for speech infrastructure. He never trusts the mainstream opinion, because it's usually built by people protecting their comfort, not challenging their logic. Elon doesn't fear being called wrong. He fears building on lies. That's why he doesn't ask what the crowd accepts. He asks what physics allows, because nature doesn't care about opinion. Gravity doesn't bend for trends. Thermodynamics doesn't negotiate. Truth isn't democratic. That's the core of his thinking. You either build from truth or you build on a script. Most build on scripts. That's why nothing changes. Industries chase metrics instead of meaning. They measure what's easy, not what matters. They fear risk more than they fear irrelevance, so they polish the old instead of inventing the new. Elon does the opposite. He burns the old first. He knows that the longer a broken system survives, the more people depend on it. Not because it works, but because it's familiar. And familiarity is the enemy of intelligence. Familiarity makes you think you understand something just because you've seen it before. But repetition is not proof. Consensus is not clarity. Just because an idea is old doesn't mean it's wise. And Elon treats old ideas the same way he treats faulty code. Audit it, break it, and rebuild only what holds under pressure. That's why he's hated in every room he enters. Not because he disrespects people, but because he threatens their comfort. He shows them what it looks like to start from zero, and that makes everyone else look borrowed. Because most innovation today is just remix. Elon doesn't remix. He reboots. He rewrites the interface of entire industries. And he does it not because it's profitable, but because it's necessary. When the crowd optimizes a dying model, Elon kills it and builds something no one's ready for, until it's obvious. And by then, he's already moved on. That's what innovation really is. Violence against mediocrity, enforced by truth. And Elon enforces truth like a machine. The herd never leads. It waits. It waits for confirmation, for permission, for someone else to take the first punch. And by the time it moves, the moment is gone. That's why Elon doesn't trust the herd. Not because they're evil, but because they're late. Always. They wait until the data is overwhelming, until the trend is obvious, until the risk is zero. But by then, the upside is gone too. That's the curse of consensus. It's safe. It's popular. And it's useless for building anything that hasn't already been built. Elon doesn't follow trends. He builds what becomes the next one. Most people need validation to act. Elon needs logic. If something makes sense, he doesn't care if no one else sees it yet. He moves. Alone. Early. Exposed. And yes, often wrong. But being wrong early is still more powerful than being right late. Because when you're first, you have leverage. When you're last, you're noise. Look at Tesla. People laughed. Electric cars were punchlines. Toyota dismissed it. GM ignored it. The media rolled their eyes. But Elon didn't need applause. He saw the physics. He saw the raw cost of batteries dropping. He saw the inefficiency of combustion engines. And while everyone else waited for proof, he built the proof. That's why he leads. Because he doesn't wait to be told something is possible. He proves it by doing it. The herd moves by signal. Elon moves by principle. That's not arrogance. That's discipline. Most people call something impossible until someone does it. Then they act like they believed all along. The herd always claims history, never risk. They join after the blood is dry. They cheer the revolution when it's already a parade. But Elon doesn't want parades. He wants pressure. He knows that discomfort is the price of leading. That ridicule is the sign you're early, that if no one's laughing, you're probably late. The reason the herd is wrong isn't because they're stupid. It's because they outsource their thinking. They watch, they wait, they copy. They let the market tell them what to care about. They let fear dictate their timing. But Elon doesn't wait for momentum. He creates it. And he doesn't confuse movement with progress. The crowd often runs in circles, loud, excited, and completely lost. That's what happens when you follow signals instead of systems. Elon builds systems, models that don't change with opinion. That's how he makes decisions before the world catches up. He's not reading headlines. He's reading cause and effect. That's how he saw the potential in PayPal before digital payments were obvious. That's how he saw the failure of NASA contracts before SpaceX even had a rocket. That's how he saw the collapse of attention infrastructure before acquiring X. He didn't need the herd to validate his instincts. He just needed the math to make sense. The crowd needs comfort. Elon needs coherence. That's why he doesn't need to be understood today. He just needs to be right tomorrow. And that's why people hate him. Because he makes their hesitation look small. Because he acts when they're still waiting to be liked. Because he reminds them that the future isn't written by the cautious. It's written by the unreasonable. And Elon is the most unreasonable person in every room he enters, not because he wants to be different, but because he refuses to be late. You can't lead if you're waiting for everyone else to move first. You can't innovate if you're benchmarking the past. You can't build what's next if you need proof before belief. The herd is always late and always loud. But Elon, he's quiet, focused, already gone. While they're still debating the risk, he's building the result. And by the time they agree, he's building again. That's the rhythm of leadership. That's the price of truth. You cannot lead from behind the herd. There's a dangerous lie that holds modern society together. It says the systems we grow up in are designed for our success, that school exists to educate, that work exists to reward value, that success is the result of compliance. But Elon doesn't believe any of that. Not because he's cynical, but because he pays attention. He looks at the system like an engineer looks at code, function by function, output by output. And when he looked, nothing added up. The education system wasn't producing thinkers. It produced memorizers, followers, people trained to wait for instructions. The workplace didn't reward innovation. It rewarded obedience, politics, consensus. And the idea of success was just a loop of status signals, titles, degrees, corner offices, that meant nothing once you zoomed out. Elon doesn't care about appearances. He cares about mechanisms. If a system isn't producing useful outcomes, he doesn't ask how to fix it. He asks why it still exists. That's why he never romanticized school. He saw it for what it was. A factory. Bells, rows, standardized content, one-size-fits-all everything. He dropped out of Stanford after 2 days, not because he couldn't keep up, but because he realized the syllabus was behind reality. It wasn't designed for the frontier. It was designed to produce employees. So he left, and later, when he became a father, he didn't enroll his kids in any elite academy. He built a school from scratch. No grades, no subjects, no lectures, just problems worth solving. That's how Ad Astra was born. Because Elon doesn't believe kids are broken. He believes the system is. And the workplace? Just as bad. Most companies don't want innovation. They want stability, predictability, safe returns. So they build layers of middle management, meetings, HR policies, performance reviews, all designed to reward compliance, not courage. Elon tore through that. At SpaceX, there are no traditional titles. Anyone can talk to anyone. Interns challenge senior engineers. What matters is not who you are, but what you build. He calls it a flat structure, but it's deeper than structure. It's a rejection of hierarchy as truth. Elon believes that value doesn't care about rank. Ideas don't care about source, and that's why he breaks the chain of command every time it gets in the way of speed or truth. He doesn't believe in titles. He believes in results. That's why he sleeps at the factory. Because when something breaks, he wants to feel it in his bones, not in a spreadsheet. Most CEOs talk strategy. Elon runs wiring. Most executives ask for reports. Elon rewrites code. Because the higher you go in a broken system, the more abstract your view becomes. Elon resists abstraction. He wants proximity. He wants to stay close to the edge of failure. That's where clarity lives. That's why he doesn't celebrate success the way others do. He doesn't throw parties. He escalates pressure. Because success, to him, is not a destination. It's a brief window before entropy kicks in. And he knows that most people use success as a reason to stop thinking. But Elon uses it as a reason to question harder. What's next? What still doesn't work? What looks fine but is actually rotten at the core? That's how he sees most of modern society, shiny on the surface, hollow underneath. School, work, even the economy. Elon doesn't want to reform these systems. He wants to replace them. Because he knows you can't debug a structure built on the wrong logic. You have to rebuild the logic itself, and that starts with seeing things clearly, without nostalgia, without fear, without needing the crowd to agree. Most people inherit their systems. Elon interrogates them, and when they fail, he doesn't fix. He starts over. Everyone says they want to think differently. Until you actually do. Then they flinch. They mock. They isolate you. Not because you're wrong, but because you're a reminder. A mirror they didn't ask to see. That's what Elon learned. The cost of thinking independently isn't just rejection. It's loneliness. When you question what everyone else accepts, you become a threat. Not because your ideas are dangerous, but because your presence challenges their comfort. People don't hate new ideas. They hate what new ideas make them feel. Uncertain, small, exposed. Elon lives with that tension every day. He doesn't crave isolation. He just chooses truth over approval. And truth, by definition, is exclusive. It doesn't bend. It doesn't try to fit in. That's why it costs so much. Because the moment you commit to truth, you start bleeding comfort. You start losing consensus. You stop being invited to the table. Elon knows this. He's been called arrogant, reckless, unstable. But that's the tax you pay when you stop outsourcing your mind. When you choose to think like an engineer, not a politician. When you act on logic before permission. The world isn't built for people like that. It punishes what it doesn't understand. Because understanding takes effort. And most people choose narrative over effort. So they label what they fear. They put it in boxes. Ego. Narcissist. Disruptor. It's easier to dismiss a man than to examine his ideas. But Elon doesn't need you to like him. He needs the system to work. That's why he keeps going. Through lawsuits, through headlines, through betrayal. Because he's not optimizing for reputation, he's optimizing for coherence. Most people want to be respected. Elon wants to be useful. And usefulness requires clarity, even if clarity costs connection. That's the trade-off. The sharper your thinking, the lonelier your road. Because most people want agreement, not truth. They want to be seen, not challenged. Elon challenges everyone, including himself. He rewrites his beliefs in public. He changes direction mid-launch. He fires people he once praised. Not because he enjoys conflict, but because he serves one master, the mission. And the mission doesn't care about feelings. It cares about physics, deadlines, results. That's what makes Elon cold. Not cruelty, but calibration. He doesn't operate on hope. He operates on stress-tested logic, and when something fails that logic, he cuts it, no matter how much it hurts. That includes people. That includes himself. That's the real cost of thinking differently. You don't just lose comfort. You lose pieces of your past, your status, your social armor, even your identity. Because to think differently is to become someone new. And most people aren't ready for that. But Elon decided long ago that comfort is not the goal. Truth is. So he keeps choosing truth, even when it isolates him. Even when it breaks relationships, even when the cost is everything but regret. Because Elon doesn't want to be understood today. He wants to be correct tomorrow. And that kind of clarity doesn't come from the crowd. It comes from solitude, from stress, from staring into the void long enough that the void starts answering back. That's the real work. Not building rockets, not selling cars, but standing alone with a thought no one claps for and following it anyway. You don't need to be Elon to think like him. You don't need billions. You don't need companies. You just need discipline, the kind of discipline that breaks your autopilot. Most people don't lack intelligence. They lack structure. They think in loops. Elon thinks in systems. That's the difference. And that difference is learnable. It starts with one decision: to stop outsourcing your mind, to stop waiting for consensus before acting, to stop needing comfort before asking better questions. First, delete the phrase, "that's how things work," from your vocabulary. It's a mental virus. Every time you hear it, pause. Ask, why does it work that way? And, does it still make sense? If the answer is vague, political, or defensive, it's probably broken. Second, identify your inherited scripts. Every belief you hold. Interrogate it. Where did it come from? Who benefits from you believing it? Would you still believe it if you had been raised in a vacuum? Elon does this constantly. He doesn't just question society. He questions himself. Every assumption, every behavior, every impulse. He tracks the source. And if the source is flawed, he rebuilds the pattern. You can do that too. But it requires brutal honesty, not with the world, with yourself. Third, invert your instinct to follow. When something becomes popular, don't embrace it. Dissect it. When everyone agrees, don't celebrate it. Pressure test it. Ask, what's the root assumption here? And if it's wrong, what else collapses with it? Elon calls this logic chains. Ideas don't live in isolation. They form structures, and one broken idea can corrupt the whole structure. Most people just patch over the break. Elon replaces the whole line. Because he's not building for approval, he's building for coherence. Fourth, reduce latency between thought and action. Most people overthink. Elon tests. Fast. Loud. Publicly. He doesn't wait to feel ready. He moves when the logic lines up, and if it fails, he adjusts. But in motion. Always in motion. Fifth, keep proximity to failure. Elon doesn't build in boardrooms. He builds in factories, in test sites, in stress zones. He wants to feel the temperature of the problem, to absorb the friction directly. Most people avoid pain. Elon embeds in it, because pain is a compass. It shows you where the lie lives. Sixth, audit your goals. Are they yours or copies? Do you want what you want because it's true to your design, or because it fits your peer group? Elon doesn't measure his life by how well he fits. He measures it by how far he reaches. That means letting go of outcomes that score well socially, but fail logically. And finally, detach from applause. Detach from speed. Detach from the crowd. Elon is not fast because he moves quickly. He's fast because he doesn't wait for validation. His speed is subtraction. No ego, no noise. Just signal. And that signal comes from building a brain that runs on first principles. Not preference, not popularity, not fear. So if you want to think like Elon, you don't need to imitate him. You need to subtract like him. Subtract what's fake. Subtract what's borrowed. Subtract what's comfortable but incoherent. And when you're left with only what survives pressure, you'll find something stronger than motivation. You'll find clarity. And with that clarity, you won't need courage. You'll just move. You've seen how Elon dismantles everything the world takes for granted, how he thinks, questions, builds. The systems you grew up with, he doesn't trust them. He rebuilds them. And now that you've seen how he thinks, the real question is, can you afford not to? If you're ready to see the truth behind education, success, fear, and the myth of motivation, explore the rest of the series. Each video goes deeper. Each one removes another illusion. This isn't just content. It's a system reset. Subscribe to Mind of Musk. Not to follow, but to stop being led.